All right, today we're picking up with First Chronicles in our study of Old Testament synthesis. First Chronicles. Jerome suggested that the Hebrew title would be better if it was called a chronicle of the entire divine history. This is in the fourth century. The Greek translation of the, if I've got it right, according to Baxter, is that it's called The Things Omitted. The Things Omitted. Seems a little strange. The Hebrew title is Divrei Kayamim, which means the events or the annals of the times. The events or annals of the times. That's not a bad title. First Chronicles chapter 27, verse 24. Joab the son of Zeruiah began to number, but he finished not, because there fell wrath for it against Israel. Neither was the number put in the account of the Chronicles of King David. Interesting reference to the idea of the account of the Chronicles. In the Hebrew, like 1 Kings and 1 Samuel, these two books were originally joined. They were divided by the Septuagint scholars. And this division was not continued into the Hebrew Bibles until 1517 with the Bomberg edition. So in our particular issue, the Bible, it is divided. We're talking about the Hebrew Bible. The Septuagint, talking about that strange title a few moments ago, which Baxter mentioned, Unger adds that the Septuagint title is really an inaccurate heading. It's paralipomena, which is translated things passed over or things omitted. And it apparently has reference to historical facts that were omitted from the books of Samuel and Kings. In other words, this is supposed to be, the Greek title infers that Chronicles is sort of like a catch-all or an addition of things that were not mentioned and which were omitted in the first two historical books of the same period. And Unger says that this is inaccurate because there are all kinds of parallels. As far as the placement of these books in the Scriptures goes, we should realize that this actually takes us to the end of the historical notations in the New Testament. Okay? Like it actually takes us to the end of the Old Testament history. But in the Septuagint and the Vulgate, and hence in the English versions of the Bible which we have, unless you get one of those chronological Bibles, Chronicles follow the kings rather than being right at the end as the Hebrew Bibles and the Talmudic scriptures find them. For instance, in our Hebrew edition of the Bible, Chronicles is the last book. It's placed last. All right, so the title of First Chronicles is somewhat interesting. I think the Hebrew title is a good one, the events or the annals of the days. The English title, Chronicles, I think is more closely connected to the Hebrew title than it is to the Greek, because the Greek title is somewhat ambiguous. Now, who wrote the book of Chronicles? J. Vernon McGee says it was probably Ezra, because the book resembles the style and the language of the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. He suggests that First Chronicles is probably a compilation of diaries and journals of the priests and the prophets, which was put together by Ezra. It's not that Ezra was the eyewitness to all these events, but he was more likely the compiler. And if Ezra was the compiler, as he suggests, then this would make the date of the writing during the Babylonian captivity. Unger concurs. He says that the Jewish tradition considers that Ezra was the author, but points out that there was no conclusive evidence one way or the other. Baxter agrees. Probably it was Ezra, he says, for three reasons. There's no evidence against the concept. And scholars are almost unanimous in the view that it's one man's work through Chronicles, Ezra, and Nehemiah. And thirdly, when you do a character study on Ezra, there's no one that was more obviously fitted and capable of doing this than Ezra. So to say that Ezra was the author of First Chronicles does not mean that he wrote it all. It just means that he compiled it, probably compiled it. Nor does that mean that others probably could have had a hand in it as well. Right? We've already touched on the date of writing, but just to cover this point as we're working our way through, McGee says that the book was written during the Babylonian captivity. What does that make? What time period is that? Can you remember?
Yeah, it's 560 to 560.
Right. It's not bad. John Phillips thinks that the book was written after the Babylonian captivity. In his view, the purpose of the book was to interpret for the benefit of the remnant that had returned the meaning of their history. In other words, to explain their present circumstances in terms of recent history. As far as the actual date or contents, how long a period we're talking about here, Phillips says that First and Second Chronicles together cover the longest period of any of the books of the Bible. And that's because First Chronicles opens with all those genealogies, right? And they go right back to Adam.
You mean the Old Testament books?
Yeah.
John.
To return to future. So, yes, as far as the Old Testament books, this particular book, if you include Second Chronicles, covers time from Adam to the decree of Cyrus to allow the remnant to return. In passing, and this has a bearing on the actual dating of the contents as well, Phillips points out that the same number of kings reigned on the thrones of Israel and Judah during the monarchy. And the monarchy certainly is covered in these two books. However, Judah outlasted Israel by 136 years. Unger says that the book of Ezra was written between 400 and 350 BC. He would make it fairly late.
Same with this guy here.
Schofield?
No. I got this Holman. This one here has this Renwick. Houses under M. Renwick. I got different ones for different sections. And he says, the Book of Chronicles was compiled from a wealth of historical data and the early registers and records, besides Samuel and Kings. A careful study of the book has led many trustworthy scholars to place its date between 430 and 400 BC. There is no need to postulate a later date.
All right. See, I mean, Ungers is a conservative scholar, and that fellow is definitely a conservative scholar, and it's just, they're guessing, really.
Yeah.
They're just putting in a general time frame. It obviously happened before the New Testament, and before the Civil War of the intertestamental period,
And it says, but they still hold, like in the book, and he holds it to Ezra. It says that Talmud, most Jewish writers and fathers of the Christian church, Jewish fathers, hold it to Ezra.
Mm-hmm. The main means of putting a general limit on it is the Greek Empire. Right? Obviously, these people still lived during the Persian Empire, and they know fairly well when that completed. I think it was at 339 or something like that. I think that's when, 333, 334, something like that. That's when the Greeks. So it had to have been before that, right? Now, Unger quotes William F. Albright, who is a world-renowned archaeologist, and Albright points out that the post-exilic date of the writing of this book is confirmed by archaeology, in contrast to the Wellhausen theory that places it from 350 to 250. And he simply rejects the arguments that support or stand for the Wellhausen theory. The traditional view then is supported. The author used a wide array of sources, carefully referred to them, and thus these books are in substantial agreement with Samuel and Kings. Schofield places the date of writing and the date of events about the 5th century BC. Baxter says that the evidence for the date of writing is that it's post-exilic. He gives a few references, maybe we can look them up. Chapter 6, verse 15. And Jehozadak went into captivity when the Lord carried away Judah and Jerusalem by the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. So obviously this had to have been written since that time because it's looking back on it. Chapter 9, verse 1. So all Israel was reckoned by genealogies, and behold, these are written in the book of the kings of Israel. And Judah was carried away to Babylon for their transgression. Another reference to the exile. Chapter 3, verses 16 to 24. And the sons of Jehoiakim, Jeconiah his son, Zedekiah his son, and the sons of Jeconiah the captive, Shealtiel his son, Malchiram, Pedaiah, Shenazar, Jechemiah, Hoshama, Nedabiah. And the sons of Pedaiah were Zerubbabel and Shimei. The sons of Zerubbabel, Meshullam, and Hananiah, and Shelomith was their sister, and Hashuba, Ohel, Berechiah, Hasadiah, Jushab Hesed, 5. The sons of Hananiah, Pelatiah, Jeshiah, and the sons of Raphiah, the sons of Arnan, the sons of Obadiah, the sons of Shechaniah, the sons of Shechaniah, Shemaiah, the sons of Shemaiah, Hattush, and Egal, and Beriah, and Neriah, and Shaphat, 6. The sons of Neriah, I guess there's no need for me to read all these. But he's given us the genealogies right down through the post-exilic period. We know that Zerubbabel and Ezra were responsible for the return of God's people, and we have their children mentioned here. So obviously the book has to have been written after that. That's actually probably the best proof we've come across so far. Right? It brings the genealogies right down to the post-exilic time. Chapter 36 in the book. That must be 2 Chronicles 36. Verses 22 and 23, the last verses. Now, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord spoken by the mouth of Jeremiah might be accomplished, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and put it also in writing, saying, Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth, hath the Lord God of heaven given me, and he hath charged me to build him an house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is there among you of all his people? The Lord his God be with him, let him go up. Alright, so it takes us right to the ascension of Cyrus. So as far as the record of actual historical events, the date extends perhaps even to the period of the return of the remnant. At least, Baxter says, to a very late date in the life of Ezra and Nehemiah, because of that reference in chapter 3 that records their sons. Right? Also, Baxter points out scholars agree that the Hebrew language and orthography of Chronicles fits the post-exilic period. The language is corrupted by Aramaisms and Chaldeisms learned by Jews in Babylon. It's an additional dating factor. The Hebrew language itself is somewhat different. Now, when you talk about important people, which is our next major heading, the book of First Chronicles is quite important from a Jewish perspective, because we know that the Jews highly valued genealogies because of the importance, the practical importance that was attached to a genealogy. That was your proof that you had a right to be and to own land. And it was a privilege to be a Levite, to be able to serve God. So if you couldn't prove it, you were out of luck.
I was just thinking that issue that rose up in modern day Israel about who is a Jew. It seems again just their character, cultural personality. It's the guy that knows genealogy, genealogy and science.
Right.
Big thing for I think with Semitic type thinking, I guess.
Right. Yeah, it's not so much your heart and your relationship with God. It's still concerned about the historical things. The first 9 chapters of First Chronicles give us all the genealogies, take us right from Adam down through Hanan. Hanan was a son of Azel, and this is traced back to Gibeon, Saul's line, right? From Adam to Saul's descendants. Kind of interesting.
What would they do Saul's descendants?
Well, he was one of the kings, and he did have survivors. Remember Mephibosheth and
Did they do David's too?
I guess so. Where does it give Judah? Yeah, it gives chapter 2, verse 15. It mentions David the seventh, whose sisters were Zeruiah and Abigail, sons of Zeruiah, Abishai and Joab and Asahel. Abigail bore Amasa.
So why? Because they deal with Benjamin last, and Saul's part of Benjamin, right?
Right. The first 9 chapters here of this book are crucial when you're comparing the chronologies. Like, it's a great double check. So as far as the record of the genealogies goes, we have hundreds of people mentioned here. Judah, the line of Judah is particularly described in this book. The son of Onan, is described as evil. Achan transgressed in the devoted things. Jeconiah is described as a captive. Jabez prayed to God for deliverance. We have 22 princes of the family of Simeon, specifically described as victors over the Amalekites. We have Bera of Rehoboam, a descendant several generations removed, who was described as the one that was carried away captive by Tiglath-Pileser. We have mighty famous men. We have singers and servers. And interesting. After the exile, If you pay close attention to these genealogies, you will discover that only the males were counted. Remember, it mentions David's sisters. All right, after the exile, I think only the males were counted. In the post-exilic period, you had 690 Judaites and 956 Benjamites and 1,760 priests and other Levites, including 212 porters. Getting past the actual genealogies in First Chronicles, since First Chronicles takes us from the earliest days of the monarchy down to the death of David, it's obvious that we have here the major players that are recorded in 2 Samuel and in 1 Kings. 2 Samuel and 1 Kings. So 1 Chronicles is parallel to those two books. Right? David, of course, Saul and David are the main characters. Of course, we have other important people that don't stand out in the other books. Because this is a different book, this is a priestly book, you have somewhat different perspective. You have 862 Levites mentioned in Jerusalem, chapter 15. You have in chapters 24 to 26 the Levites that were divided by lot for governors and musicians and porters.
24, 26.
Right? Chapters 26 to 27, you have various officers and leaders appointed over the nation's business. This is the only information we have in the Old Testament on this kind of stuff. And by the way, remember when it says, when it comes to the New Testament, it talks about Zechariah being at the course of Abijah? You have to go back to the book of Chronicles to discover where, that the very system that was in place in New Testament times dated itself from the system that's described, the governing system of the priesthood and Levites that was set up during the days of Solomon. And really, it's only in First Chronicles you have information about that. So it is a very important book. All right? I think that First Chronicles is the only place in the Old Testament that mentions the 340,600 warriors that made David king in Hebron in chapter 12. The other books give us the notation that that's where he set up his kingdom. I think only Chronicles mentions the number. So looking at the people in the book of Chronicles, you have two things stand out. Number one, kings, the kingly lines, are particularly emphasized, and the priestly lines, or the Levitical lines. There's a dramatic emphasis in this book on the ministry, organization, responsibilities of the Levites. Their dwelling places are mentioned. 23 cities from the Levites descended from Kohath, 13 cities from the Levites descended from Gershom, and 12 cities for the Levites descended from Merari. Plus 32 cities of refuge throughout the country. Right? So the book is a gold mine of information about details, in spite of the fact that historians view 1st and 2nd Chronicles the most unhistorical parts of the Old Testament, aside from say, the first 11 chapters of Genesis and stuff like that. The humanists, in that historiography course I took at the university, when talking about the Bible as ancient literature, they were highly skeptical of the accounts of 1st and 2nd Chronicles. And the reason is obvious. Because of the priestly emphasis in the book. They think, and because it duplicates material in 1 Samuel and 1 2 Samuel and Kings, that it's the most untrustworthy. It's obviously comes later. The person wasn't really an eyewitness. So in their minds that lowers the value of it because it's obviously written after the other books. And because it has such a priestly emphasis, that the emphasis on the supernatural and stuff like that, that they don't think that it is worth much. That shows the bias of the secularist, that downplays the importance of anything religious. As far as key events goes, in the book of 1 Chronicles, the book opens with Saul's death in chapter 10 in Mount Gilboa. So we should make a note there that actually the events in 1 Samuel should be, they're totally eliminated. 1 Samuel's events, we're talking about the actual reign of Saul and the conflict between Saul and David, right? All of that period of preparation for the Davidic kingdom is absent.
We just have chapter 31 of
Right.
1 Samuel.
Right. Right? All right, so tracing our way through, there's 7 or 8 major events in 1 Chronicles, opening with the ascension of David to kingship in Hebron. Chapter 14, we have David's establishment and his major victories. Chapter 15, we have his big move to Jerusalem. It's a key development in David's kingdom. Chapter 16, we have David's key involvement in the worship of God in Jerusalem. From a priestly perspective, King David was a great king, a man after God's own heart. He was responsible for bringing the ark back to Jerusalem, putting it where it belonged, restoring the Levitical service to the preeminence in the life of the nation that it should have had in the first place. Chapter 17, we have reference to the Davidic covenant. Chapters 18 to 20, we have David's victories in war. Chapter 21, we have David's sin in numbering the people again. Chapter 22 records David's preparations for the temple and for handing the kingdom to his son. Chapter 23, we have the enthronement of Solomon and the reorganization of the Levites. actually this reorganization of the Levites goes right through chapter 26. So 23, 24, 25, 26, there's 4 chapters given here to the great changes that took place in the among the Levites during the time of Solomon. And then the book closes with basically a record or a chronicle of the administration of the kingdom under Solomon. So as far as the historical notations in the book go, the major places in First Chronicles basically center in Jerusalem. Although Saul in chapter 10 died in Mount Gilboa and David was made king in Hebron, the primary focus from chapter 15 right to the end of the book is centered in Jerusalem as far as geography goes. Right? So First Chronicles is really focused right there in the center in Jerusalem, the capital. All right, in our next class we'll pick up with keys to the book and the message. Any questions?